I would like to welcome you all to the third seminar of our AI and CSS seminar series organized by MACSSL and GLODEM, of the spring semester. Today we have a great pleasure of hosting Dr. Başak Özparlak, and she is going to talk about a really interesting topic. I will not go into details. We have about 40 minutes for the seminar part, and then we will have the Q&A session as usual. Before I give the floor to Dr. Özparlak, I would like to introduce her briefly. So we'll read her biography for you all. Dr. Başak Ozan Özparlak is a lawyer, lecturer, and researcher. She is the partner attorney at Ozan and Ozan Law Office and also a part-time lecturer at Özyeğin University. She gives cybersecurity, blockchain, and law, and artificial intelligence and law courses at Özyeğin University's Faculty of Law. Priorly, she gave labor law and introduction to law courses at Bilgi University's Faculty of Health Sciences, Department of Health Management. She graduated from Marmara University's Faculty of Law. During her undergrad studies, she worked as a social development volunteer for child refugees at the Norwegian Peace Center in 2000. And she obtained her LLM degree in European law from Marmara University's European Union Institute and a PhD degree in private law from Marmara University's Faculty of Law. She is the co-author of the book called AI in Health Sciences with her chapter AI and Law, and the forthcoming book titled Emerging Technologies and Law, Artificial Intelligence, again with her chapter Discrimination on Hiring and Artificial Intelligence Technologies, which is forthcoming this year. She contributed to the 6G white paper on trust, security, and privacy under the coordination of 6G Flagship Center at Oulu University and the first AI and Law Report of Turkey, conducted by three major bar associations of Turkey. She delivers speeches and writes on the intersection of law, technology, design, and society. At many diverse platforms, from museums to economic conferences like that of ours, and from legal journals to magazines. Her research interests therefore include legal implications of human technology interactions, the future of work, privacy, security from an interdisciplinary perspective. With that, I will give the floor to Başak Hocam. Thank you so much, and we look forward to your talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mary Argan. Thank you for inviting me here. It's a pleasure being with you, and I'm looking forward to your contributions also after my talk. And congratulations for establishing this kind of a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary research center, because they are so vital for when we are especially tackling with the issues deriving from the technologies at the societal level. And my talk, titled Legal Challenges of AI and Overview and Current Developments, will be on not only on the legal perspective, but it will inevitably entail some political and economical perspective also. Why? Because AI technologies have their roots from the political relations between states and their implications on society, mostly at the economical side also. They impact the economical relations in society. Therefore, my talk will entail both legal, economical, and political framework also. And let me begin with some analogy from art. In my opinion, artificial intelligence technologies are tools, not the ultimate aims for our society, like an art tool, maybe. Before the invention of photo cameras and before they became widespread, the ambassadors used to travel with painters with them to another cities, to different states. And the painters traveling with these ambassadors did not only make paintings of the diplomatic relationships, not only the diplomatic meetings, but also they made paintings of the cities they have visited, so that we can see how Istanbul, for example, looked like for hundreds and years ago, thanks to Farvay and others. In the far right, for example, here made a panorama of Istanbul from the Para Museum in Istanbul. But after photo cameras were invented and became widespread, as an artist, it's not only important to paint what you see, but it gained much more important to paint with your own perspective, and adding different texture into your painting gained much more importance. And Devrim Erbil, for example, looked at the same panorama of Istanbul, like the far right, and he created something else in his picture, Istanbul Kırmızısı, Istanbul Red, with adding different textures like to his paintings. And now, data and machine learning algorithms are also art tools. And Refik Anadol, a world-known Turkish digital artist, he uses data, and he collects data from Bosphorus, the same Bosphorus, and he collected the voices, the movement data of Bosphorus, and created a data sculpture called Bosphorus. And when we stand in front of this data sculpture, we hear the voices, we see the movement of the Bosphorus. So it is not the technology itself, but our intentions, our preferences determine our future. And therefore, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, of course, and the regulations on AI must consider this and consider AI as a tool, not an aim. And they must consider the economical and political framework and realities also when they are deriving a framework of AI technologies. And let's look at the architecture. This is Paris, as most of you know, and you can see a geometrical shape from above. Haussmann, a city planner hundreds of years ago, was appointed to replan Paris, so that they appointed Haussmann to form a city that disable rebellion. So Haussmann preferred using a grand roads called avenues like Champs-Élysées. It's so hard to make a barricade in these large roads. And he also preferred a geometrical shape. Why? Because it is so much easier to see rebellion coming from the streets, and it's so much easier to detect the rebellions from this perspective. So Haussmann here used a geometry as an architectural tool to form a city depending on the ones that appointed him. So this is like artificial intelligence technologies as a tool. We are going to use them, whether what kind of a society do we want to live in? A democratic, a free society? We can use artificial intelligence technologies in this way. Even we can reduce the effects of climate change by using artificial intelligence technologies. We can use it this way. Do we want to live in a much more controlled, suppressed society, under control, a surveillance society? We can use artificial technologies, intelligence technologies in this way also. It depends on our choices. So let's look at the literature. Alexander Dumas described the feelings of Comte de Monte Cristo in his novel. When Comte de Monte Cristo sees telegraph towers, he wonders himself. He cannot help himself to think, is there a fairy in it? How can messages from one place to another travel from one place to another? Is there a fairy in it? Even though he knew the exact background technology of telegraph. And today, even though we know the background technology, which is artificial narrow AI, we are talking about not a general AI, but we are talking about artificial narrow AI, machine learning, deep learning algorithms. But sometimes, especially when they are embedded into hardwares, Android hardwares, sometimes we cannot help ourselves to wonder, is there a fairy in it? Is there a conscious being in it? But there is not. And as legal scholars, and while we are making rules or while we are interpreting rules, We must well aware of the fact that there is no conscious being, and therefore we must avoid using humanizing wordings like trustworthy AI when we are talking about artificial intelligence technologies. Because there are no trustworthy AI, as you know. There must be, however, trustworthy governments and trustworthy corporations when they are deploying this kind of technologies into societies. Therefore, they must be legally responsible against people, the harms that's driven by the usage of artificial intelligence technologies. And as it is underlined by the Kahai Committee, which is mandated by the Council of Europe in 2019, the Ad hoc Committee on Artificial Intelligence. And Kahai Committee formed two important documents. One of them is Trust Towards a Regulation in AI Systems, and the other one is Feasibility Report. And in their feasibility report, they underlined the fact that AI actually is not only a technical term, it's also a socio-technical form, because the societies define the effects of the artificial intelligence technologies also. When you deploy an AI technology in Sweden, it has some reflections different, and in China different. It depends on the societal relations. It also depends on the power relations into society, the check and balances, the control of power relations. And also as a technical term, data is at the center of these technologies. And therefore, the rules defining the protection and the privacy of the data plays an important role when we are talking about AI and law. And the privacy and the security of data draws the general legal framework also of AI and law. And also the power relations, since they play an important role, the competition law and the control of power, the rules on control of power, the control of market power also play an important role. Therefore, also competition law is very important when we are drawing a legal framework for AI technologies. Therefore, multidisciplinary researchers and also legal scholars, we also need each other's expertises as well, because when we are answering this question, is there a special legal branch called AI law? We can easily say, no, not yet. However, we can say that AI technologies, the usage of AI technologies, have impacts onto each and every field of law, from labor law to tax law, from insurance law to international law, because they impact society in every field. We use artificial intelligence technologies almost every field of life, from health to politics. And the power of multidisciplinary approach, because of that, very, very important. And are we talking about a futuristic, talking about AI technologies? Of course not. And this is why we need to regulate at least a general framework of AI technologies. For example, in the UK, due to COVID-19 pandemic, the exams of high school students also were cancelled. So the scores of these students were recalculated by using AI algorithms. What happened? Unfortunately, the scores of students coming from unwealthy families or coming from immigrant families were lower than the other students. So while protesting this, the high school students actually were well aware of the fact that it is not the algorithms themselves, but it is the governments who chose to deploy this technology to make the assessment of their exams. So after the protest, the governments stepped back and they canceled the scores that have been calculated by the AI system, and the teachers defined the scores again. In his book, The Fabric of Reality, David Deutsch, who is also one of the pioneers of the quantum computation. He says in this book that prediction is not explanation itself. And inductivism is a dangerous source of many sources of errors because it is so plausible, so convincing, but not true. So they are not only ill designs in the sense of ethics also, but they are ill designs in the sense of science sometimes, because they merely depend on observations which alone cannot be used to draw inferences. Therefore, we need explanations, but also the explanation must consist deficiencies in the system itself. When we are talking about the control relations, since this technology depends on data, and data is a driving force for artificial intelligence technologies, who has the control of data? Who owns the data? These questions are very important to ask and very important to answer also for the legal field. And you may remember that Donald Trump was excluded from Twitter by Twitter. And in a lawsuit in the US, the Supreme Court Justice Thomas stressed the unprecedented market power of digital platforms. And he made a resemblance that digital platforms, he said, are like common carriers in US law and UK law. Although they are private entities, their business model actually depends on them to be being open to public. So when they exclude someone from their platform, governments shall have some monitoring and controlling power upon these exclusion powers. And not only conservatives, but also Democrats, like Bernie Sanders also said. He said that he was not very comfortable that Trump was excluded from Twitter, because today Trump, but maybe tomorrow I will be excluded from the Twitter, by Twitter, because there is no democratic control of these platforms' decisions. Therefore, we must underline the fact that, in my opinion, if I'm talking about, of course, the legal scholars and the lawmakers, we must focus not on the technology itself, but the market realities and concentration of power and the political framework of today's world. And with this regards, an important step has been taken at the European Parliament. Lara Walters, a member of the European Parliament, has designed a report on that multiple companies must be accountable against the society because of the harms they give to people, but also to the environment. And this report, accepted by majority in the European Parliament in March, and the members of the European Parliament said that there must be a mandatory due diligence system for the corporations, not only established in the European Union, but also in the third countries, if they impact the European Union, individuals in the European Union. If they want to make a business in the European Union, they must make mandatory due diligences for the harms they pose against human rights and against environment. This is a very important step, in my opinion, so that, and both international law, international relations also begin to play important role. This isn't about only or solely artificial intelligence, of course, but there are lots of companies making the systems. For example, in the health sector, there are lots of companies, and they must regard these steps also. And actually, this at left, you can see a master thesis I coincidentally read, and it's perfect, I guess. It's from Istanbul University. It is on the legal personhood of multinational corporations. It tells the story and the history about the course on multinational corporations' legal responsibility in international level. And Nevada bill in the US, there is a draft bill, of course, and it focuses on the tech companies, and it will entail, if it's accepted, it will entail a right for companies to create governments. So we are at the edge of decide something, not only the companies, of course, but also the control mechanisms, like governments also must be under scrutiny of people if you want democratic societies to be prevail also in the future as well. But while making laws, while designing rules on technology, for example, we must very aware of the facts that the economic relations, power relations must taken into account. What am I talking about? Let's look at to the UK in 19th century. After the Industrial Revolution, machines were introduced to the factories, as you know, and anymore no muscle power were needed anymore, and even fingertips of children can use this machinery. So that children were used for industry in very awful conditions. So factory acts were introduced to reduce the effects of awful working conditions, both for children and women also. However, even though these laws aim was to reduce the working conditions, awful working conditions, since small enterprises couldn't afford to comply with the necessary measures introduced by these acts, the result of these acts were the rise of the big monopolistic power. When we look at the data protection regulations around the world today, especially GDPR and in Turkey, the Personal Data Protection Act, the company is required to financially require big finance to provide a legal compliance. They need lawyers, they need technical professionals. So if these regulations aim to protect data protection. However, maybe they are leading the way that the big corporations such as the big fives going to be bigger and bigger, because the monetary fines are not very enough for them. Data is at the core of artificial intelligence technologies, we said. Data was always important for human societies, even in Incas. According to the Harvard University Anthropology Faculty, they revealed that even though Incas did not have any written materials, any written language, they had these quipus, you see, and these quipus with notes and different colors on them represent some important information about the Incan civilization. They stored their important events, they made also some computations also with these strings, with the notes and the different colors, changing them. So today we are at the same place. We are generating and creating data banks to feed artificial intelligence technologies. Therefore, when regulating these systems, not regulating these systems, but regulating the control of data and control of power, because today power means data actually. Power means also the seeds, like in the agricultural revolution. Data, in my opinion, is equally important as seeds. Therefore, we must find a way to feed everyone, to protect everyone, and to stop legally the powerful to get more powerful. Because in order to establish a welfare society, a sustainable society, we must control legally the power and use this technology for humanity, not against humanity. When we see a little autonomous weapons, there is a campaign, ongoing campaign in the United Nations, Stop Clear Robots campaigns. Actually, it's about the little full autonomous weapons. and they require meaningful human control. Why? Because it is so important to understand that if we are talking about a fully autonomous weapon, it is always under threat of cyber attacks. So it is so important to sustain major humanitarian laws principles here. And therefore, in my opinion also, little fully autonomous weapons must be banned, and there must be meaningful human control for these weapons in order to find accountability measures also. As I've said that the Council of Europe mandated an ad hoc committee called Committee on Artificial Intelligence. And one of the studies of this committee was feasibility study, and they underlined some of the risks of artificial intelligence technologies, which are some of them: discrimination, creation of a surveillance technology, weakening and declining of human autonomy, information distortion, electoral inference, as we have remembered by the Cambridge Analytica scandal, digital exclusion, attention economy, and chilling effect. A special chilling effect is linked with the weakening of human autonomy. Why? Because even if we live in the most democratic nation today, even if we were living in a most democratic nations, if we feel like we are under constant surveillance, digitally or physically, we have tendency to begin to limit our expressions. And one day it will turn to our freedoms. We will begin to limit our freedoms also. This is why important to ban mass surveillance, indiscriminate mass surveillance. And they propose some things, that mandating practical mechanism to enforce compliance, that they offer some things: human right due diligence, impact assessment about human rights, continuous monitoring of these technologies, regulatory sandboxes, audits, and certification. Certification is so important because the Kahai feasibility study says that conventions, International Council of Europe conventions, the parties are always the states, but now the corporations have ultimate power, so gained so much power, and they are not only economic but also political entities anymore, some of them. So that we must focus on the corporations as well, and they must have some certifications also about the risks on human rights of artificial intelligence technologies. And second document of the Kahai Committee was towards regulation of AI systems in 2020. And they draw some red lines. Red lines means that if this technology poses an unreversible harm against human rights, then it can be banned totally or restricted, such as this indiscriminate use of biometric identification, including facial recognition, AI-powered mass surveillance, including behavioral surveillance on online platforms, and personal, physical, mental tracking, assessment, profiling, scoring, biometric and behavior recognition nudging, and AI-enabled social scoring, like it is in China right now, and covered AI systems and deepfakes. Covered AI systems is against transparency rule, ethical principle also, which is underlined in the ethical guidelines of trustworthy AI of EU High Committee of Ethics. Because we must be aware of the fact that if we are in front of an AI system, or we are in front of a human being, because if we cannot know that, we cannot know our rights and what are the risks of our rights. And human AI interfaces must be taken into serious, they said. And they said also in this report that maybe new human rights might be introduced in the future. For example, a right to human autonomy, an agency and oversight over AI, and explainable AI. Explain the logic of the decisions that is taken by the interrelations the AI systems poses. and a separate right to physical, psychological, and moral integrity in light of AI profiling, and a strengthened right to privacy to protect against mass surveillance, indiscriminate surveillance in this sense, and adapting the right to data privacy to protect against indiscriminate online tracking on individuals using personal or non-personal data. It is important because today's data protection regulations focuses only personal data. However, the technology anymore and also the Internet of Things technology is on the way. And it is important to define that it's not only personal data. Non-personal data can be identified to a specific person today also. It must be underlined. And when we look at to the European Union, of course, GDPR was a major step. Even it is not directly on artificial intelligence, but since artificial intelligence technologies depend on data, the protection of data, as I have seen, is important. And in 2008, GDPR was a very important step for the regulation of the framework of AI technologies. And the next year, 2019, ethics guidelines for trustworthy AI was adopted by the High Expert Committee in the European Union. And the same year, the next year, the European Commission, formed an AI white paper in 2020. And after that, the European Parliament also adopted some resolutions on the artificial intelligence, which are on the ethics and AI, liability and AI, intellectual property rights and AI. And there are some important draft regulations. One of them is Data Governance Act, but I must say that there is a big debate around this Data Governance Act because Data Governance Act philosophy is based on data altruism, and it is being underlined by the European Data Protection Board that it must be in line with the GDPR. They have some doubts on that. And Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act are also play a vital role, but they are still, I must underline that they are drafts, but they also focus on the control of market power and the control of digital services. And they are so important, and there are very big and heated debates going around these draft regulations. And this week, a draft regulation on AI, yesterday, the day before yesterday, I guess, made public. And generally, we can say that the framework of the draft regulation of AI is in compliance with the highest guidelines, which I mentioned before, towards a regulation in AI and the feasibility study. And there is a very big step is going to be taken that a new board on AI is going to be invented, a European AI board. It's like the European Data Protection Board in the GDPR system. And the scope of this AI regulation is like the GDPR system also, because not only the AI systems generators in the EU, but also in third countries of these generators of AI systems will be in the cover of this regulation if they affect the rights and freedoms of individuals in the European Union. And red lines, like in the Kahai Committee's documents, are driven here. And the usage of some AI systems are to be banned, including citizen scoring, like in China. And it's indiscriminate surveillance, distortion of information, and deep fakes. There must be, they say, a labeling if there is a deep fake here. If this is a deep fake, there must be labels. And also, not only artificial intelligence technologies themselves solely is important, because some other technologies are developing at the same time. For example, new communication technologies, they use also AI systems, and also the 6G is very important in my opinion. It is planned to be introduced in societies in 2030, and the human mind and human body itself also be a part of the network in 6G systems because of the interfaces, nano interfaces, networks, and medical implants. So that it is so important to deal with especially the human rights issues, human rights risks posed by the artificial intelligence technologies from today, before it's being too late. And you can see Cardinal Richelieu here, which is a real historical character, but also was a guest for Alexander Dumas' novels also. There is a saying that Cardinal Richelieu told his men to bring me some 6 men, or the most honest 6 men of this country, so that I can find some rule to make them criminals. So it is so important that who controls data, who controls it, who owns it, and do we want to live in a depressed and suppressed and under control society? It is our choice. It will be our choice. And thank you very much. Looking forward to Q&A session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hocam. This was so informative and also really inspirational. So without further ado, let me open the floor for questions or comments. Esra. I see a hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi, thank you for this nice presentation. I'm really interested in AI, and I'm a medical student, and I'm really interested in AI and its impact on health sector. I want to ask a question about how can I say usage of AI. For example, if we use AI in our health system, and for example, it will evaluate a radiological test result, and it made a mistake. And then who will be the responsible? Hospital, doctor, our government, or the developer of the AI? Who will be the responsible for that, and how can we regulate that?
Thank you. It's a great question and a very important question. Yes, artificial intelligence applications are widely used in radiology and monitoring MR results, right? And who will be responsible when we rely on the results that is brought by the artificial intelligence system? Actually, there is no specific answer for this question in any country's regulations. However, we can look at what we have. What we have is, in Turkish law, for example, tort law, if you are an employer also, and an employee makes a mistake, then you are responsible also as an employer, for example. And this is a strict liability. But, however, of course, why is the harm? Why that the harm occurred? Maybe there was a cyber attack of the system. Then it is got to get much more complicated. But therefore, we must, for example, in the EU, there is a Cyber Security Act in 2020, and Germany wants that the framework of the Cybersecurity Act to be mandatory, which is cybersecurity certificates. For example, if as a hospital you have cybersecurity certificates for the systems you use, then your accountability will, percentage of accountability will decline. Therefore, the case of the incidents reasons play major roles when defining the accountability also.
Thank you so much. May I ask another question?
Sure.
As I know, just according to my research, mainly developers of AI are white and male gender people. And because of that, how can I say, AI contains their provision or
Bias.
biases, and if it's not contains gender equality or race equality, how can we produce a law for this AI technology to use?
Thank you very much. By the way, I truly recommend you to watch Coded Bias. It's also Netflix also. It's about this technology, this bias is also. And yes, you are right. And the Council of Europe said that they published a report on education and AI systems. And there they underlined the same factor that you mentioned. And they said that from the beginning of the education, the girls must be promoted to choose STEM subjects from the earlier level of education. And it is very important. Besides that, how can we, I guess the labor movement also plays a vital role. Why? Because, you know, sometimes technology corporations make their employees to sign non-disclosure agreements, right? And these non-disclosure agreements made them to be silent about the bias and indiscriminative risks that the artificial intelligence system they are working on. So that in the US, there is a labor law scholar, Ifeoma Ajunwa. She began a campaign that stop non-disclosure agreements. And it is important for me, not only legally, but legal field also must concentrate on the labor relations as well, because it is important to have a collective power against these biases, not only individually. Only individually we can sue something, we can make claims, but it will be so weak. So in collective movements and collective labor movements, collective consumer movements will also play important roles, in my opinion.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hojam. We have Jack in line.
Thank you so much for a really elegant talk. I loved the blending in of historical thought and literature as well. It really brings out the concepts.
Thank you.
Them. I just wanted to ask a question about the category of explainability. It kind of troubles me in what I've read regarding explainability as a sort of way of regulating or getting around the inherent problems within first assumptions of some certain AI systems. So I was just wondering, have you come across any provisions or proposals that really bring explainability into a realistic framework? That is to say that it's beyond just giving an answer, beyond just saying this is how it happened, and more giving those affected an angle of recourse, in a sense, to either reverse a decision that's been made by a system or to correct the system more generally. I'm just wondering if you've come across any sort of regulation or proposal to that effect. And thank you very much again for an excellent talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I saw a proposal, not a regulation, however. Sandra Walter from the Oxford University Institute has a great paper on this, the explainability of AI, on the explainability of AI. She proposes a simple solution like this. If you apply for a credit to a bank and you are rejected, but you don't know why you are rejected, because the assessment made by an artificial intelligence algorithm. So there must be an answer for you like that. You are rejected because if you had that much money in your bank account, you could be accepted. Your will be accepted. This simple. I don't know its effects, but the most important proposal was that, and commonly applauded actually. and referred in both EU and the Kahay's report, also the paper I mentioned. And also the technical, there are technical steps that are being taken. For example, privacy preserving AI machine learning systems. Maybe if the governments, for example, for social services, prefer this kind of privacy preserving or federal machine learning systems, and they will make some tax decline for this kind of technologies. Maybe it is important also, because both technically and legally it is so hard to tackle solely, but we can do it by all together, I guess. But there is no concrete and real solution I have not seen yet, unfortunately.
Thanks again.
Thank you, hocam.
Thank you.
Next we have Berk Ertaş.
Thank you for your presentation. And my question will be related to the data interpretation process. So how will AI pay regard to these data that's gathered from states? Because as you mentioned and give an example like data equals a seed, and there occur some risks of AI, like you mentioned, discrimination. So however, the voting process runs according to the population growth of the member states, and even environmental improvements carry such conflicts over the international stage. Will the AI solutions be credible, and how? Because I was looking at news like European Union's predictions about AI project, and they are seeing, they are looking to the AI process like it can find some solutions to the farming process and its environmental impact. So again, my question was AI solutions' credibility over the issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's a very big question, really. It depends on the state that we are talking about. It's so hard. What kind of governmental or democratic structure that the states have? Are they transparent? First of all, it's so important. We have seen the importance of transparency. Altogether, we have witnessed the importance of this during COVID-19 pandemic, as you are well aware. This is the reason, but since data is concentrated into some few hands, they have unfortunately massive lobbying power onto governments also, and governments also use this kind of technology. So they are very dark ties between these corporations and governments, especially if we are talking about not transparent, non-transparent governments. The issues and political and legal questions is getting bigger and it's getting difficult to answer. It is so important to have democratically transparent states. Not only corporations, of course, but state governments also play vital role here. For example, in France, also in China, here in France, the artificial intelligence algorithms are being used for mass surveillance, and even in the European Union's draft regulation, the exclusion is given to governments in mass surveillance by algorithms.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, hocam. Next we have Gülsüm Naz.
Hello, thank you for the presentation as well. I wanted to ask something about the adjustability of this program, of this AI to Turkey, actually. I don't know, like, if you will be able to like give a decent answer, because I also don't know. That's why I wanted to ask. In like other criminal cases, I know that the establishment of an AI in Turkey was not like so possible. We were like talking about the AI programs in criminal cases, criminal courts in China, actually. And then like we came up with the result, like in one of my classes, saying that since the pattern, the like court and their like results, their decisions on the cases, there's no like such pattern. They're not like so correlated with each other. It may be like difficult to adjust something like that in Turkey. I was wondering if this system, since like it's going to gather like the information of more than 20 countries, will it be able to, something that we will be looking up to from Turkey's perspective, or would it need like more justifications in order to establish something like that in Turkey, not only in court cases, but in other areas, such as you mentioned agriculture a few seconds ago. It may be in education, like in other sectors as well, I wonder.
Thank you very much. It is very unclear actually right now. I know that the procedure is ongoing on the National Artificial Intelligence Strategy Report of Turkey, is going to be published in this year, I guess. And there we will see the areas that the artificial intelligence technologies is planning to be introduced to. I know that there are some agriculture, tourism, and transportation areas are underlined as far as I hear about. But in criminal justice system and at the face of the technology today, I'm not a big fan of them to be used in Turkey. I guess a state must be mature enough and much more respected to rule of law before deploying these technologies into a court system. But legal technologies is on the way. I know it. It's also in the US and the European Union, it's $1 million industry, and legal technologies plays vital roles, and therefore the law faculty's quality must be better also to tackle with the unemployment crisis driven by the use of artificial intelligence technologies in the legal profession.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hocam. Next we have Barışca.
Hocam, thank you for your elaborative expressions and being our guest for this entertaining event. My question would be, in the context of Turkish law of obligations, who would be held responsible for the autonomous actions, like I mean authorized buying or selling orders or autonomous bits of AI, who would be held responsible? Should we rely on the Article 66 or another article? What would you say on that? Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, the strict liability for the owner of the car. If you give your car to your friend and the harm is occurred during this process, you are also responsible. And also, of course, the producer is responsible for the deficit of the car also. But it's not only a product. It's so important to underline that because it's also a service when we are talking about autonomous systems, because there's a data flow and there is a cloud service that stores data coming from the cars. And therefore, not only for that product we are talking about anymore, we are talking about also a service. Therefore, there might be both in the EU and Turkey, the product liability regime maybe in the future, in the near future, will be updated, in my opinion. And the cybersecurity, of course, plays a vital role here also for the autonomous cars, because as Zeynep Tüfekçi hocam underlines somewhere that it is not the trolley problem that poses a risk here. It is the cyber threats. It poses a major risk here. Therefore, for example, Germany tries to bring certificate system, mandatory certificate system for the autonomous vehicles also, especially like in the planes, the black boxes in the planes. The accident data plays a major role here also. The United Nations is discussing about this accident data plays vital role. Therefore, we will need accident data, why this accident happened, when this accident happened, on fully autonomous level, or when it is the human driving, then which autonomous level we are talking about.
Thank you, Hocam.
Thank you.
We have Zeynep.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. It was very entertaining. I wanted to ask if you think these changes in law were fast enough. So you know that the technology is moving very, very fast, and I don't know. Like, do you think it's gonna catch up with it soon to avoid scandals like Cambridge Analytica?
Thank you very much. Yes, law always follows technology. However, we might create a framework. We can use ethics also here. We cannot immediately define or immediately regulate an aspect of technology. However, we can use ethical framework, but ethical certificates may play a major role here. Or, for example, under the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals certificate, for example, if you want to gain a competitive advantage against your competitors, if you have this kind of a certificate, you will be preferred, for example, in the market. That must be provided also next to the legal framework. And also, if we focus on not merely on step-by-step technological developments, but the logic of it. The logic is data and controlling data. If we control the controllers of data, it will be easier to follow up the technical risks that posed by the developments.
Thank you, Hocam. Next, we have Efe in line.
Hi, Hocam. First of all, thank you for your informative presentation. My question will be regarding an answer you gave to, I think it was Hassan's question. You told that the mass data were in the hands of a few, and they were directing or manipulating governments in ways so that they will gain what they want. So I was wondering, would you suggest competition or antitrust laws on data, or they may be more elaborate than they are in any case? So what would be your suggestion for this?
Thank you very much. You issued underlined a very important aspect. Yes, in my opinion, even though I'm not a competition lawyer or expertise, but I believe, so I do believe that both data protection law and both competition law play major roles while we are defining the general framework of artificial intelligence technologies regulation. Because as you have said, that data is at the center and the control of data is important. So we must limit the concentration of data, because if we do not, it will pose risks on the fair regulations as well, since the lobbying power.
Thank you, Hocam. Next, we have Selin.
Hello, thank you for the great presentation first. And my question was about, so we know that there are many scientists that work on AI, artificial intelligence technologies, and we know that there are many people who search the questions on AI about ethics. So how involved are these two groups? Do you know about that? Do these AI technology groups have these ethics groups in them, or these are just two separate people?
Thank you very much. Actually, big companies like Google and Facebook had formed their ethical boards also, but there are so debates going around them, though maybe they are so just for doing, they may create some ethical boards. And it is important to have, maybe in the future, hopefully, maybe there will be an international, not just standards, but there will be international ethical body to give certifications, at least for the very important artificial intelligence applications posing risks against human rights. Maybe if we will provide this, maybe it will be change the game.
Thank you, John. So I actually had seen Demet's hand raise. Sometimes I lower hands by mistake. I'm just trying to make sure that it wasn't me. I also saw Osama's hand, but did I lower them by mistake? If not, I'm reading a question in the chat box. So Aliyah is asking, I have a question, but I have a problem with my microphone, she's saying. Do you think that persona data rights fall under our civil or social rights? And if it is that the differentiation matters for how those rights will be defined legally and in connection to our citizenship? Will it change the institutions that will be back in charge of those rights? And she's thanking you for the talk.
Thank you very much. Yes, it plays a major role here. And why? Because in order to establish and protect our dignity as humans, we need privacy. But privacy, in my opinion, is bigger than data protection, because data protection regulations, at least today's regulations, focus only consent mechanisms and the phrase after the data collected, but before the data collection, it is important also. We must be taken into account as human beings, and data must not be, in my opinion, accepted as a property right, because if we accept it as a property right, we then must accept to data brokerage system that there are, for example, according to the Fordham Law Faculty's research, there are 14 data broker companies that can get the school children beginning from 2 age. They can sell their data. And while we are doing online education right now due to the COVID-19 crisis, and this problem gets bigger. Today's children's data is very important, in my opinion, especially behavioral targeting. We don't know what are they going to use this data in the future for them. For example, HR mechanisms and credit scores, etc. And it is important to underline that data protection, yes, we need, but we need to reform the system of this data protection. We need to change the fabric of this system, because it is the consent is not enough, because we even do not well aware of what consent, what is that we giving consent for. It is and therefore they must be designed again, redesigned, and from 7 to 70, everybody uses this technology. Everybody is on the digital platform, so that these rules must be understandable for everyone, from every age group, from every occupation, if we really want to make a protective framework, not just a check and balance system, in my opinion.
Thank you, Ajam. Demet, and apologies if I indeed lowered your hand.
No, Ajam, you didn't actually. I was just trying to make my question understandable. So my question is also about the autonomous vehicles that you mentioned recently. We know that they have and will have many features, even affecting the human life. So do you think that AI should have the same authorization with people in the future? And I mean, not only in this field, but also in the others, maybe. Yeah, we talked about the restrictions, and people who work on these projects plan some restrictions too. So I'm curious about how far it can go when you look from the legal and ethics side.
You mentioned the legal personhood to AI systems, right?
Yeah, actually, in the also in the autonomous vehicles, especially.
This idea was introduced by the European Parliament in their resolution on civil matters of artificial intelligence technologies in 2017. And they said today in the legal systems in everywhere in the world, there are two main legal persons, real persons and legal entities. And they propose that let's introduce a third personality like electronic personality, and the harms caused by these systems themselves can be accountable, and we will find a way to for example an insurance system can be accompanied by that. After that, AI open letter, robotics AI open letter was published by the experts from both legal, philosophy, and computer science. They said that the technology is not that mature yet today. We are talking about the narrow AI systems that is designed by the human itself. No matter how humanoid it looks, it must not be the form of it. It must be the technical capacities that must be taken into account when we are talking about accountability drive of the harms driven by the artificial intelligence and robotics systems. Therefore, if we attribute legal personality to these systems, then the real accountable persons and or entities will be under shadow, and then industry will lose its ethical perspective to produce much more ethical systems, because they will be not responsible. And the second reason that I am also not a fan of attributing legal personality to AI systems is that if we attribute legal personality, it's not only the rules themselves, but how we will apply these rules. For example, in criminal liability, a criminal liability must criminal rules, not the criminal, not the punishment, but the deterrence is important according to criminal law system. And so, if a system are not aware of the actions it makes, how can we make it to deter from criminal action? It is important. It's not only a philosophical, but the application of legal rules question. But in the future, maybe if there will be ever any general AI like the human beings aware of the actions of it make, then yes, we must maybe sit on the table and talk about again a new general legal framework. But maybe, in my opinion, before that, the brain-machine interfaces will create something else that we will must focus on between human and robotic systems. There will be some consequences. For example, in the Birmingham University Cyborg 2, Everyday Cyborg 2.0 research is ongoing. It's a multidisciplinary research. They are focusing on the risks posed by the brain-machine interfaces. For example, who will be responsible if there will be a cyber attack to the neural implants, for example, and the person will act against his or her will, who will be responsible. This will be much more important. But today, at this phase of technology, I'm not a fan of attributing legal personality to AI and robotic systems, because before that, we have to much more artificial thing to regulate, which is inequalities of economy and rise of uncontrolled power of the corporations and governments.
Thank you,
Thank you for the answer and the presentations.
Thank
also.
Next, we have Özlem.
Also, thank you for your presentation, actually, and my question is related with your last sentences. We already talked about the technological improvements and other areas, but what about the governance part? Like we can use AI and data analysis to change people's opinion, and I believe that it will directly lead dictatorship instead of democracy. And what's your opinion in that case? Like, how can we prevent that? How can we make people have their own will again?
Autonomy you are talking about. It's very important indeed. Individually asking or legally asking, how can we do it?
Both.
Individually asking, well, what can we do it? It's more easy to answer. Therefore, I go first by it. Individually asking and answering this question, maybe we are educating the machine learning systems, algorithms with many kinds of data, many kinds of data sets. For example, take GPT-3. It is fed by all the written materials digitalized by human and all the social media consent. So, but we don't feed ourselves that much variety anymore, because we, for example, we read a book, an algorithm says, then you will read this book. You can read this book. You will like it. We are losing our autonomy, our capacity to take our own decisions day by day. So we must be open to ourselves, to different ideas, to different persons from different ideas. And this is important to get out from these echo chambers. It is therefore very important, because we are talking about the ones that resembling to us. We are reading books that resemble the ones that we have read before. And while we are doing it, on the other hand, the AI algorithms are fed by many variety and many data sets also. This is important to be open to different ideas individually. And on the legal side, I can say that not only focusing on the technology itself, but again, it must be the human rights and the regulations that we have right now. We must interpret it by this way, and we must give collective power to citizens of the countries again. It's so important in my opinion. This is why, for example, Google's employees were against the usage of Google and data sets by Pentagon, for example. They made it public, and Google stepped back from this project. It was so important. It is important to protect therefore, they are all related to each other, labor movements and the rights of the citizens in a country also, because collective movement we need right now.
Thank you so much, Hocam. I do not see any questions in the chat box at the moment, but I do see Osama's hand raised. So last but not least, Osama.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. A few years ago, it made news headlines. Google developed this artificial system that beat this Chinese player who was the best player in the world at Go. And I find it like very interesting that this system taught itself to become the best in the world. Now, how dangerous would this be if other AI systems around the world, whether it's used in the military or in other sectors, if they become smarter than humans, how dangerous could it be? I mean, it's kind of scary in a way, and I've seen a couple of movies where they create scenarios where IA is destroying the world. I mean,
yeah, thank you very much. I am not very scared of the AI systems themselves, but I am worried about the controllers of these systems. But still, humans and under control is controlling these AI systems. However, when you say that when these technologies, when these algorithms will act upon their will, you say, right? And
Yeah, exactly.
before coming to that phase, we must take under control the operators and the corporations that deploying this kind of technologies at the first place, in my opinion. And it is so important that to remember that data we feed is playing a vital role here. If we, for example, I've been reading the last book of The Clara and the Sun, Kazuo Ishiguro. It's about an artificial intelligent friend, and they are being sold on a magazine store, and they are looking out of the window, and they see taxi drivers fighting with each other, and they amaze what are they doing, and they learn by seeing this. So it is important to watch out our own actions, I guess, because it will be our mirror, in my opinion.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If not, okay, Nisa.
Thank you for your informative presentation, first of all. And I would like to ask, you said you're not afraid of like AIs being more intelligent than human beings, but also I see that like we've talked about human beings losing our autonomy with the AI technology, especially I'm talking about social media, and I'm seeing like children just getting so addictive to social media and losing their autonomy. Do you see this as a thing to afraid of? So that was my question.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a very important question. Yes, it's so important because the content of the social media is defined by the social media, is defined by our preferences, preferences. It's so important to know that it's not a novelty, because I have read the Kotler's marketing management book, and I was astonished when I read the lines that telling about the phase of the marketing management, because there Kotler said in 90s that markets powers using customer data, and they know what you eat, they know where you are, what you are doing, and he there in 90s said that there must be privacy preserving rules and ethical principles to control this. And this is very important to underline the fact that also these digital platforms, like Justice Thomas said, it's like they are, yes, private entities, but they are public, and exclusion from this or distortion of information by these platforms is threatening democracy also. And they are there will have some conclusions on elections also as well. So that not to cause any censorship, we must very aware of it. We must be very careful when regulating social media, because it must not be a censorship, but it must respect to human autonomy as well. We might a balancing system here, in my opinion. Yes, it's very important.
I mean, in a way, linked to the last two questions, that reminds me of one of the earlier seminars we actually discussed our earlier conversations about the movies, how Hollywood is portraying these robots taking over the world, and that in a way also leads to this bias against AI. And so maybe at the very beginning of the seminar, the thing you said about trustworthy AI, that there should actually be trustworthy governments and corporations that use AI, is, I think, also answering the last questions. It's not necessarily the evil robots taking over the world, but indeed people who are feeding them with particular algorithms and data that we need to be regulating. And I guess Pelin Hocam would be saying in this case, I mean, I keep reminding this, keeping human in the loop is at the very core of the solution. So I just wanted to throw in my 2 cents. Obviously, I have loads of questions for you, but we already bombarded you with so many questions. I'll keep them for later for our discussions. And I guess the large volume of questions you received also conveys the right signal here that we all are very enthusiastic about this topic. So I would like to thank you very much again on behalf of both MACSSL and GLODEM for this brilliant presentation with a really lively discussion. Thank you so much. With that, I will conclude today's seminar. We're having the next seminar again in 2 weeks. As usual, we will post the details soon. Thank you all very much to our audience as well for the interesting and also really what I would consider as important questions that kept the discussion we had really fruitful, I believe. So thank you all very much, and hopefully see you very soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Argun. Thank you very much, everyone. It was perfect to meet your questions. I love them both.
Thank you, Hocam. See you all.
Yeah.